Hello, I'm Melody Thomas Scott. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The Young and the Restless spoilers. Is Jack afraid of death? No. Jack only regrets and is angry that Victor has trapped him in this cellar. Let's face each other like men. Jack has lost to Victor many times, but also won many times. Victor is attacked by young people, his thoughts are imposed upon him, and he chooses to blame Jack. This is a cage built from hatred, old grudges, and a man who has spent decades perfecting the art of control. When Patty appears, fans think she will save Jack, but he understands they are allies. Jack is just pretending. Jack knows Patty always reports his every action and thought to Victor, so he is very angry and at times wants to kill Patty. Since Patty's arrival, the loneliness had disappeared, but the pressure had intensified. He knew he would die in a few days if he didn't escape. Everything was under Victor's control. And those thoughts often turned to Kyle. To his son, Jack wondered if Kyle knew the truth, if he was searching for him somewhere in the shadows of Genoa. The thought that Kyle might blame himself for what had happened filled Jack with a deep, heavy sadness. One night, everything changed. Jack heard voices. At first, they were faint, almost drowned out by the buzzing of the building's ventilation system. But gradually, the sounds became clearer. Jack cautiously moved closer, inching against the door, pressing his ear against the cold surface as he tried to understand the conversation taking place outside. Jack and Patty talked. They talked about the future, about tomorrow, and how to decide. While Patty wasn't paying attention, Jack strangled her. There would be no more waiting, no more games. Victor had decided that Jack Abbott's story would soon end. The way Victor spoke of it was disturbing, as if he were discussing a business deal rather than the end of a man's life. For a moment, fear crept into Jack's chest. He wasn't afraid of death. What frightened him was the thought that his life might end here in a forgotten room without the chance to say goodbye to the people who mattered most. Without the chance to say to Kyle the things he always thought he'd have time to say later. But Jack forced himself to breathe slowly. Fear only weakened him. And Jack Abbott had never survived by being weak. When Patty finally entered the room, she carried the uncomfortable tension of someone trying to convince herself that everything was under control. Her eyes avoided Jack's for a moment before she began to speak in a soft, almost apologetic voice, making the situation even stranger. She told him to calm down, to listen, to accept what was about to happen. Jack watched her carefully. And then he did something that surprised himself. His hands tightened around Patty's throat as he pushed her back, using all his remaining strength. Patty gasped in terror, her hands clawing at his arms as Jack tried to restrain her. For a brief moment, it seemed it might work. If he could hold her long enough, if he could force her to open the door, there might still be an escape. But Jack underestimated one thing. Victor was never far away. The gunshot ripped through the room like a bolt of lightning. In an instant, everything froze. Jack's grip loosened. His body stiffened as the bullet struck him from behind. A searing pain ripped through his chest, making it difficult to breathe, and he staggered backward. Patty collapsed to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. Victor stood in the doorway, his gun still raised, his expression cold and unreadable. Jack stared at him for a long time, as if trying to understand how their decades-long rivalry had led to this brutal moment. His legs began to tremble, his strength drained away as he slowly fell to the ground. Patty crawled toward him, her earlier fear replaced by something else, something fragile, something akin to regret. The rhythmic, sterile beep of the cardiac monitor was the only sound tethering Jack Abbott to the mortal world. The air in the private VIP suite at Genoa City Memorial Hospital was thick with the suffocating scent of antiseptic masking, the undeniable impending arrival of grief. Shadows cast by the dim artificial lights of the medical machinery danced across the pale-drawn features of the once formidable patriarch of the Abbott family. Recent events, a relentless cascade of brutal corporate warfare, devastating family betrayals, and a sudden catastrophic physical collapse had finally taken their ultimate toll. They had drained the vibrant fighting vitality from a man who had survived decades of cutthroat battles in the boardroom and the bedroom. Jack Abbott, a titan of industry, a man whose smile could charm the stars from the sky and whose wrath could shatter empires, was fading into the sterile white sheets of his deathbed. Sitting vigil beside him, her hands trembling uncontrollably as they clutched his cooling, fragile fingers, was Patty Williams. Her presence in this room was a profound testament to the complicated, deeply tangled web of history they shared. Despite her own well-documented struggles, the madness that had occasionally clouded her past, the heartbreak they had endured, and the years of emotional distance, she could not bring herself to abandon him. Not now. Not when the great Jack Abbott looked so frighteningly vulnerable, stripped of his bespoke suits and his commanding aura. Patty's tear-filled eyes traced the familiar lines of his face, now deepened by pain and exhaustion. She remembered the man he used to be, the man who had once held her heart so completely. Watching him slip away breath by agonizing breath felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She smoothed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, her thumb gently grazing his feverish skin. "Hold on, Jack," she whispered into the quiet room, her voice cracking with the desperate, futile hope of the grieving. "You have to hold on. You fought your way out of worse than this. You're an Abbott. You don't know how to surrender." But the shallow, rattling sound of his breathing told a different story. Jack was not fighting anymore. He was preparing for the end. Suddenly, the rhythm of the monitors shifted. A harsh, raspy cough tore through Jack's frail body, shaking the bed frame. His eyelids, heavy and bruised with exhaustion, fluttered open. His gaze, usually so sharp and piercing, was clouded, struggling to focus on the woman beside him. Jack Patty gasped, leaning in closer, her heart leaping into her throat. "I'm here. I'm right here. Don't try to speak. I'll get the doctor." She moved to press the call button, but with a sudden desperate surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Jack's hand clamped down on her wrist. His grip was surprisingly tight, the grip of a man clinging to the edge of a cliff. "No," he wheezed the words scraping against his throat like dry leaves on concrete. "No doctors. Out of time." "Jack, please," Patty pleaded, tears spilling over her lashes and dropping onto his hospital gown. "You need rest." "Listen to me," Jack commanded, his voice barely more than a strained whisper, yet carrying the undeniable weight of a dying man's final decree. "Patty, you have to listen. I don't have long. And this cannot die with me." Patty froze, recognizing the intense burning urgency in his fading eyes. She leaned down until her ear was mere inches from his lips, her own breath catching in her throat. "What is it? What do you need to tell me?" Jack swallowed hard, his face contorting in pain as he fought against his own failing body to form the words. It's about Adam." Patty pulled back slightly, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. Adam Newman. The name felt like a ghost in the room. Jack Adam is dead. He died in that explosion. We all mourned him. The whole city mourned him. "Lies," Jack hissed the effort, causing another violent spasm of coughing. When he recovered, his eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of profound sorrow and righteous anger. It was all a lie. Adam is alive." The words hung in the sterile air, heavy and suffocating. Patty stared at him, her mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of what he had just said. For a fleeting second, she wondered if the lack of oxygen, the heavy narcotics, or the fever had finally driven Jack to hallucinations. But the absolute clarity in his gaze, the desperate lucidity of a man unburdening his soul, told her otherwise. "Alive," Patty breathed out the word, feeling foreign on her tongue. "How? How is that possible? They found the DNA, they had the funeral." Victor Jack forced the name out like a curse, his jaw clenching. Victor orchestrated the whole damn thing. He staged the explosion. He planted the evidence. He faked his own son's death. Patty felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and numb. Victor staged it, but why? Why would a father do something so unimaginably cruel to his own family, to his grandchildren? "Control," Jack whispered, his energy rapidly depleting. It's always about control with Victor. Adam was a threat, or Victor thought he was protecting him from something worse. It doesn't matter. He played God. He buried his son alive to the world, keeping him locked away in some gilded cage, hidden from everyone who loves him. As the horrific truth of Jack's words washed over her, a profound, sickening realization began to take root in Patty's mind. The puzzle pieces of the last few months, the strange occurrences, the cryptic conversations she had overheard, and most importantly, the way Victor had recently maneuvered her own life, suddenly snapped into terrifying clarity. Victor had been paying for her recent accommodations. He had been the one to suggest she take a quiet retreat away from Genoa City during the very weeks the Adam Newman tragedy had unfolded. He had sent his fixers to check on her, framing it as an act of benevolent charity toward an old family acquaintance. But it wasn't charity, it was containment. Patty's breath hitched as the sheer scale of the manipulation hit her. She had been a pawn, a mindless, convenient chess piece on Victor Newman's grand sick board. He had manipulated her movements, ensuring she was nowhere near the places where the cracks in his massive cover-up might have been visible. He had used her history, her fragility, as a weapon to keep her compliant and out of the way. She felt a deep, visceral sense of betrayal, a violation of her autonomy that cut deeper than any knife. "He used me," Patty whispered, her voice trembling not with sorrow, but with the first sparks of a white-hot, consuming rage. "Victor used me to help cover his tracks. He knew I wouldn't ask questions." Jack squeezed her hand, drawing her attention back to his fading presence. "He uses everyone, Patty. But you can stop him. You have to stop him." How Patty cried softly, "I'm just Patty Williams. Who is going to believe me against the great Victor Newman?" "You don't go to the police," Jack instructed, his breaths growing shallower, the pauses between his words stretching longer. "Victor owns them. You don't go to the press, he'll spin it. You go to her. Sally Spectra." Patty blinked, surprised by the name. "Sally? Why Sally?" "Because she loves him," Jack said, a faint, tragic smile touching his lips. "She truly loved Adam, and he loved her. Victor broke her heart. Let her mourn the man she wanted to build a future with, just to keep them apart. Sally has the fire. She has the strength to tear Victor's empire down to the studs when she finds out what he stole from her." Jack's grip on Patty's hand began to loosen. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor started to slow, the pitch dropping in a terrifying countdown. "Promise me, Jack," gasped, his eyes locking onto hers with a final desperate plea. "Promise me, Patty. You find Sally. You tell her the truth. Don't let Victor win. Don't let Adam rot in the dark." Tears streamed freely down Patty's cheeks, dripping onto the pristine white sheets. She leaned over, pressing her forehead against Jack's. "I promise, Jack. I swear to you, on my life, I will find Sally. I will tell her everything. I won't let Victor get away with this." "Thank you," Jack whispered. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling, seemingly looking past the sterile tiles into something beyond. "My beautiful Genoa City." So many secrets. With a final soft exhalation, Jack Abbott's chest stopped moving. The monitor beside the bed emitted a long, continuous, piercing tone, the flat line. Patty sobbed, shaking his shoulders gently. "Jack, no. Please, no." But he was gone. The great Jack Abbott had finally lost his last battle, leaving behind a legacy of triumphs, mistakes, and one final explosive secret. Patty wrapped her arms around his lifeless body, burying her face in his chest as she sobbed. Her heart was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Jack was one of the few people who had ever truly seen her, who had treated her with a modicum of respect, even when the rest of the world had written her off. Losing him felt like losing an anchor in a stormy sea. But as the nurses and doctors rushed into the room, gently pulling her away from the bed to begin their futile resuscitation efforts, the crushing weight of her grief began to morph. As she was escorted out into the brightly lit, sterile hallway, the sorrow in her chest crystallized into something hard, sharp, and dangerous. Hatred, a deep, venomous, all-consuming hatred for Victor Newman. She stood alone in the corridor, her back pressed against the cold wall, staring blankly ahead. Victor had played God with Adam's life. He had played God with Sally's heart. He had played God with Patty's sanity. And he had forced Jack Abbott to spend his dying breaths agonizing over a monstrous injustice instead of finding peace. Patty clenched her fists until her fingernails bit painfully into her palms. She realized the monumental, terrifying burden that Jack had just placed squarely on her shoulders. She was the sole keeper of a secret that possessed the destructive power of a nuclear bomb. If she revealed it, she would be declaring open war on the most powerful, ruthless man in the state. Victor would try to destroy her. He would smear her name, drag her past mental health struggles into the light, and try to have her locked away in Fairview forever just to silence her. She had to be smart. She had to decide the exact right moment to strike. She had to face the terrifying prospect of going up against the Newman machine. But as she thought of Jack's final pleading look, her resolve hardened into steel. She was no longer the fragile, easily manipulated Patty Williams. She was the harbinger of Victor Newman's destruction. Meanwhile, miles away from the hospital, high up in the monolithic glass and steel tower of Newman Enterprises, Victor Newman stood exactly where he always stood, at the apex of his world. The CEO office was bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun, casting long, imposing shadows across the luxurious room. Victor stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a crystal tumbler of rare aged scotch resting comfortably in his hand. He looked down at the sprawling metropolis of Genoa City, a kingdom he had built, conquered, and ruled with an iron fist for decades. A smug, satisfied smirk played on his lips. His empire was secure. His family, though fractured by grief, was safe under his watchful, omnipotent eye. He took a slow sip of his scotch, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down his throat. He thought of Adam, his brilliant, rebellious, dangerous son. In Victor's twisted, narcissistic mind, faking Adam's death had been a masterstroke of paternal protection. Adam had been spiraling, making enemies, threatening the very fabric of the Newman legacy. By removing him from the board, by locking him away in a secure, undisclosed location far from the prying eyes of the world, Victor believed he had saved his son from himself. The collateral damage, the tears of his other children, the devastation of the woman Adam loved, the mourning of the city, was merely the cost of doing business, a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the Newman name. Victor turned away from the window, glancing at the imposing portrait of himself that hung behind his desk. He felt completely invincible. He had tied up every loose end. He had paid off the right authorities, falsified the right documents, and manipulated the right people, including the gullible Patty Williams, to ensure that the truth would remain buried forever. He was entirely blissfully unaware that the foundation of his meticulously constructed labyrinth of lies had just been shattered in a hospital room across town. He had no idea that his darkest secret was currently walking out of Genoa City Memorial Hospital armed with a dying man's directive and a thirst for vengeance. Down on the street level, the cool night air hit Patty's tear-stained face as she exited the hospital's sliding glass doors. She pulled her coat tightly around her trembling frame, her mind racing with a million terrifying thoughts. She had to find Sally Spectra. The thought of facing the fiery, passionate redhead filled Patty with a sense of profound dread. Sally was currently living in a nightmare, trying to piece together a life that had been detonated by Adam's supposed death. Patty knew what grief did to a person. She knew that walking up to Sally and telling her that her tears had been for nothing, that her mourning had been orchestrated for Victor's amusement, would cause an emotional cataclysm. Sally would have to face the impossible, mind-bending reality that the man she loved was still breathing, locked away somewhere in the dark. The revelation would cause absolute emotional chaos. It would tear open wounds that were barely beginning to scab over. It would force Sally to completely reshape her future, abandoning her current path of healing, to embark on a dangerous crusade to find Adam and bring him home. But it was the truth. And Jack had been right. Sally deserved the truth. She was the only one with the sheer, unadulterated grit to stand up to Victor Newman and demand her life back. Patty began to walk down the dimly lit sidewalk, her footsteps echoing in the quiet night. With every step she took away from the hospital, the burden of the secret grew heavier, yet her purpose grew clearer. This revelation was not just a piece of gossip, it was a seismic event. It promised to unleash an earthquake of unprecedented magnitude, one that would brutally shake the Newman family to its very core. Victoria, Nick, Nikki, they would all discover the monstrous lengths to which their patriarch would go. The fallout would be biblical. As Patty disappeared into the shadows of the Genoa City night, the stage was set. Victor Newman sat in his ivory tower, believing he was the untouchable master of the universe. But the ghost of Jack Abbott had just handed the match to Patty Williams, and soon the entire Newman empire would be engulfed in the flames of the truth. Sally Spectra was about to be awakened from her nightmare, only to be thrust into a war that would change Genoa City forever.